Okay, we're now moving into the second lecture for law of property and estates, and in this one I'm going to quickly go over the handout that has to do with the Bill of Rights. I believe I'm calling it handout 2 here, but it may be listed as something else on Blackboard, but it is there. And it's just quickly a listing of the items in the Bill of Rights. As we said in the last video, the Bill of Rights was the first addition to the initial Constitution. The original Constitution was written to provide a unified government for the 13 colonies. 99% of that document dealt with the establishment of that government, how it would be created, how elections would be held, what the different parts of the government would be, what their powers would be. But that, looking at that, people in the various states felt that that was not sufficient. They were nervous about that government becoming powerful enough to deprive them of their rights and their freedoms. And so a deal was made with a number of the states where it was said that, well, we'll enact this, we'll adopt it and become part of this new country, this new government. However, one of the first things that the new Congress has to do is to guarantee our rights. And so they did. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, called the Bill of Rights, and quickly going through them just for your knowledge. Some of them have to do with property, but not a lot. First Amendment, which I call the Freedom of Conscience Amendment. It basically guarantees your right to speak, to think, to believe, to worship in whatever way you choose without the government being able to impose restrictions or controls or prohibitions upon you, and without the government establishing its own religion or its own thought process or required belief system. Freedom of religion is broken down into two things: the freedom to exercise, which means you can be of whatever religious belief you want or of no religious belief at all if that's your choice, and that there would be no establishment of religion, that there could never be an official church, that the federal government could not basically give preference to one religion over another, that it must be neutral in this entire area. The second part of the First Amendment has to deal with freedom of speech and press. Again, the power to have your own thoughts, to be able to say them without being punished for them, the power to put them out into the public. Of course, press in the days of the 1700s meant newspapers and pamphlets and posters. There was little technology beyond that. Today, that has grown where it becomes a tremendous issue in terms of communications by radio, by television, by cable TV, by the internet. And any of you who have been awake for the last few months know that there's tremendous arguments going on now about what power do the internet platforms have to censor people, to control what is put on them and what is stated. Do they have the right to engage in political speech and be involved in that? All these issues are coming to a forefront and are going to be decided over the next few years, how we deal with that. Also, you have the right to peaceable assembly, to have demonstrations, to protest, to gather in groups in public, to make your wishes known, your desires known, your positions known. You have the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All of this to be done without being punished by the government for them. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Again, very controversial. The new president-elect has already said, and we say president-elect because today we're still before January 20th, but President-to-be Biden has already said one of the first things he wants to do is to take on the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and to basically end it. What rights citizens have to carry weapons, not carry weapons, what types of weapons they should be able to own or not own, has been a constant source of question. The Second Amendment and the Supreme Court has backed this up, saying that citizens do have a certain right to own guns and to possess them, but there are thousands of gun control laws on state, federal, and local levels basically saying that that right is not absolute, it can be controlled. So there is again, in the present time, tremendous argument over this. Third Amendment, billeting of soldiers. The British had a system where they sent 1,000 troops to Boston after the Boston Tea Party, when the Bostonians raided a British ship and threw the cargo into the bay. The British were not happy with that. They landed a fleet of several thousand soldiers. There was no British fort in Boston. They just went from house to house. Said, Mrs. Jones, you take 3 soldiers. You feed them, do their laundry, mend their clothes, take care of them. Mr. Williams, you take 4. You have a bigger house. That was billeting of soldiers, quartering of soldiers in the homes of citizens. That was so repugnant after the British left that no government has ever tried to do that under the United States. Technically, under the Civil War and some of the reconquered southern territories, it was probably done, but there has never been any official policy to force citizens to take in, house, and provide for soldiers. Fourth Amendment, no search and seizure without a warrant. A very big part of our criminal laws at this point in time, very important. It even plays a little bit of a role in the right to privacy that has developed in the 20th century and now into the 21st. Fifth Amendment, again, very much having to do with criminal things. No trial without a grand jury, no double jeopardy, no self-incrimination. The Fifth Amendment does get us into real estate and property a little bit. It says that the government has no power to deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So you are secure in your property, in your real estate, your personal property. The government cannot just arbitrarily take it from you. There must be some judicial process, and there can be no taking of property for government use by condemnation, which is where the government says, oh, we need a school and your property would be the perfect place to put it. We're taking it. They can do that, but they must give you just and fair compensation. Sixth Amendment, again, is almost exclusively a criminal rights amendment, the right to a speedy trial, a trial by jury, to be informed of the nature of the charges against you, to confront witnesses, to compel testimony, and most dear to my heart, the right to counsel, the right to have an attorney. Seventh Amendment creates a federal right to civil jury trials, so that if you feel you're not getting a fair shake in state court, there are situations where you can bring your civil cases in the federal courts. Eighth Amendment, again, has to do with crime. No excessive bail, no excessive fines, no cruel and unusual punishment. Ninth Amendment, very interesting, and this became very important in Roe v. Wade and the other right to privacy cases. The rights listed in the rest of the Bill of Rights are not exclusive. All rights residing in the people remain with them. So this created the idea, which has become very controversial in recent times, the idea that there are fundamental rights that we have as citizens. They may or may not be set out in the Constitution or in the laws, but that if we find a fundamental right, the government has the obligation to allow us to have that right and has no right to infringe upon it. The 10th Amendment really deals with the idea of what happens between the federal government and the state governments, and it says that any power not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution shall remain with the state government. Now, an example of that is both real estate law and the law of wills and trusts. If you want to have a question about ownership of your land resolved, you do not go to federal court. You go to state court. If you want to draft a will, there are no federal rules on drafting a will. Those are state rules. So large areas of law having to do with education, with real estate rights, with property rights, with family law and divorce, with wills and trusts and the rules of inheritance, those basically remain issues that are controlled by the states, not by the federal government. And even today, they will end up being involved in federal cases, but the federal courts have to look to what does the state law say about this? What rights do the states establish? And again, for our purposes, property law, both real property and personal property, and the whole idea of inheritance and wills and trust, those are areas of law that fall primarily under the jurisdiction of the individual states, not under the federal government itself. So, basically, those are the Bill of Rights. 11th Amendment, 12th Amendment, again, 11th Amendment had to do with allocating rights between the states and the federal government again, in terms of who could sue who and who can't sue who. 12th Amendment revised the presidential election process, which was a horror show in the beginning, remained a horror show, and in our day has become a horror show again. This just seems to be continued issues over the Electoral College. How does that work? What does it represent? How do we elect a president? After that are the Civil War amendments that we talked about in the last lecture, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. As we go on, there are some other, we're up to the 27th Amendment today. Very few of them have to do with property. Most of them have to do with voting rights. Although I have to say one of them, 16th Amendment, created the income tax, which certainly infringes upon your property rights to a great extent today. Prior to that, there could be no direct taxation of individuals under the Constitution. There were no income taxes. There was no Social Security tax, no Medicaid tax. The 16th Amendment, which was enacted in 1913 or 14, ended all that and allowed the federal government to directly tax us as citizens. The 18th Amendment enacted prohibition, which was a property issue. It basically forbade the manufacture and sale of any kind of alcoholic beverage, which put the kibosh to a lot of industries and a lot of property rights. But the 21st Amendment repealed prohibition. It was so unsuccessful that it only took them about 15 years to decide this is not working at all, and they got rid of it. Again, the other amendments basically have to do with political type things, voting type rights and that, and we don't really need to cover them here. All right, we will stop for a second. Okay.